This is going to have me on a short tether. Yikes. I know about that. One question for Mr. PowerPoint. Can we get that on full screen? I'm not quite ready to flip through yet, or flip out. I'm ready to flip out. Always ready to flip out. Doing my own introduction. Where do I start? Perhaps you've seen me on PBS History Detectives. My Sears House books, I wrote my first Sears House book in 2002, and we'll talk about this a little bit more very briefly, but in early 2002, my marriage of 24 years ended, my dear mama passed on, and The Houses That Sears Built was published. So 3 big events in spring 2002. My mom left me enough money that I figured if I didn't eat much, I could live for about 90 days until I started making money from the book. If the book didn't do well in 90 days, I had to go get a real job, and that scared the heck out of me. So I worked tirelessly getting the book into the press and into the mainstream media. And within 6 weeks, the New York Times called a friend of a friend of a friend and said, hey, we want to do a feature story on Sears Kit Homes. Do you know anything about them? And my friend of a friend of a friend said, hey, this lady just wrote this book. So in 6 weeks, I was featured in the New York Times Sunday paper real estate section. And then somebody called me and they said, hey, we're putting together a new show. It's going to be called History Detectives. Would you like to be on one of the first episodes? I said, I don't know what it is, but it sounds great. By the way, we went to Cleveland for filming, had a great time. I had my own gaffer. Everyone should have their own gaffer. It is a great experience. When my hands were cold, he brought me gloves. When I said, I think I would really like a donut with one of those little chocolate sprinkles, I had a donut with chocolate sprinkles. I loved it. So the book changed my life in a lot of ways. And I was really kind of concerned that at the end of my life, I'd end up with a Sears house-shaped tombstone, and that would be my identifying characteristic was I was the Sears house lady. But it's been a great run. It's been 20 years. So that's really, as far as a professional introduction / CV, I guess that's it. I've had a good run with the Sears home, sold a bunch of books, wrote 9 books, 9 titles altogether. And I am hoping, maybe, planning, thinking, hoping to write a book about this experience, but time will tell. And I do, so that's my introduction. Yeah, that's good enough. Here I am. And the whole point of this talk is that my life changed dramatically on September 5th, 2018, when I went in for a minor surgical procedure, an outpatient procedure. In and out in 30 minutes, you'll be back home, it'll be great. And that didn't go quite the way I thought, but I had a great time. In fact, I was relaying this story to somebody about my near-death experience, and I said, and I saw heaven, and I was floating around, and it was great, and I was having a great time, and then I had to come back to this body, and I was not pleased. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry you went through that. And I said, if you're sorry I went through that, I have not told that story very well. I do ask for your forbearance. I've given more than 200 talks in 27 states on Sears homes to a wide variety of groups, from Bungalow Heaven in Pasadena, California, to all manner of preservation groups from the East Coast, the West Coast, Chicago to Louisiana. But this is the first time I've talked in public about my near-death experience. I don't even like the word near-death experience. I wasn't near dead. I was good and dead. I was temporarily dead. I was completely flatlined for 10 minutes, and I really was having just the time of my life. Oh, that's an interesting quote. Having a good time? That doesn't work. I was just having a great time. And I resented so much that when I ended up back on the gurney, with lots of action happening around me there at the little ER, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I ended back on the gurney. They were so concerned. I'd been out for 10 minutes, no vital signs for more than 10 minutes. And they were very concerned about a significant cognitive decline. So they say, what's your name? Rosemary. What year is it? 2018. Where are you? I said, a crummy excuse for an ER. That didn't go over well, because this nurse who had been so attentive and so solicitous suddenly went to, this is not a crummy excuse for an ER. And I didn't go on, because I had a point. So, what slide are we on? Yay, let's go to the first slide. And the book, cool book, great book, sold a lot of copies. By the way, this book is now out of print. I've decided to stop printing them, stop selling them, which is a big deal. I've donated all my stuff to ODU, so I mean, this has been a big game changer. Next slide, please. Book, publicity, great fun, had a big time. Next slide. I wrote a book on Penniman, Virginia, which is just outside of Williamsburg. Penniman's a forgotten community of this area developed during World War I to make munitions for the war. Very interesting war, blah. Next slide. I spent 6 years writing that book, by the way. 6 years. But see, that was before I was dead. After I was dead, again, interesting nomenclature. Everything changed. I was born and raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, in Waterview. I grew up, my mom was a sweet, well, I don't know about sweet. She was artistic, sensitive, fascinating, interesting. She did not suffer fools gladly, had a good heart. She was a good person. Married a man that wasn't really a good fit for her. But my mom, I grew up in this house, born and raised, stayed there till I left to get married. My mom would walk the halls of the house, walk through the house, and just say, "Thank you, God, for giving me such a beautiful home. Thank you, God, for putting me in such a place, in a place of such beauty." And as a kid, that made such a deep impression on me, that a house is a place where you have love and gratitude and warmth, and it really sunk into my soul. And I think I became an architectural historian because of my mom and because of that deep impression. Next slide, please. Can you say iatrogenic? That's a hospital or medically caused disease. When I was born, I contracted a staph infection at the hospital, a newborn infant, 7.5 pounds, and it did not resolve. It turned into blood poisoning, and it became increasingly severe. It went on for 3 weeks, and at one point, as I continued to deteriorate, I had multiple transfusions, multiple transfusions. As an infant, you can't hold that much blood. But it went on, and then there came a time, it was an afternoon, the doctor went to my mom, and my mom was, faithfully by my little bed, my little crib. And my mom said her kidneys have shut down. She's now in massive organ failure, and she's not going to last the night. And they told my mom, and this is 1959, they told my mom, "Go home. They said, we are not going to let you sit here and watch this baby die." And they told her, "Go home and pay attention to your other children. This one's gone." So, emotional. I said, "Do not get emotional." So, my mom went home. My mom did not go home. She went to a friend's house. The woman's name was Margaret Gleason. Margaret Gleason was a Christian Science practitioner, which is different from Scientology. People get those confused. But my mom went to her and said, "The baby's dying." And Mrs. Gleason said, "We're going to stay up all night and pray." And those two women did that. They stayed up all night and they prayed. And my mom was at the hospital the next morning when the doors opened, and she said, it's my mama. You always get emotional over your mama. But my mom told me that as she walked into the nursery to see her baby, because no news is good news, and there hadn't been a call in the middle of the night, a nun was there holding me and said, "Your prayers saved her." So my mom only told me that story twice in my entire life, and both times she cried. But she said that the nun handed me over, Maryview Hospital, of course it's a Catholic hospital. The nun handed me over and said, "She's not better, she's healed." And they took me home. And in this near-death experience I had in September 5th, 2018, I had some familiarity as I was transitioning through this experience, and I realized I've been here before in this lifetime. I've been here. And I believe now that I might maybe have had a near-death experience as an infant. I don't know, but it explains a lot, because my whole life I've been, and Trish has told me not to use that word, but an oddball. I've been different. I've had a knowing, a feeling, a sensing, an intuitive sense. I see things other people don't see. I feel things other people don't feel, and I've always heard the angels talking to me. I don't know what age I was before I realized not everyone always hears the angels talking. So it's been an interesting life. Boy, I signed up for if you can sign up for stuff before you come to this life, I checked off every checkbox on the menu. I'll take everything, every experience that will give you the most possible growth. And I think God or the angel said, that'll crush you like a bug. I said, I don't care, let's do it. So, I don't know what I was thinking. So, next slide. There is not pictures to be taken of me until I was about 3 months old, because she said you were so thin, and she didn't want any memories of that time. And you notice she's holding me safely away from the 3 land sharks. So you can see they want to take a bite out of a foot there, can't you? Next slide. And there is my brother Ed. Apparently the fattening up process continued for a long time. I'm about 9 months old there, and he's feeding me a corn dog. Because in the Fuller family, and I might have been crying, who knows, but if I'm crying, I'm just, hey, who's not going to stop crying for a corn dog? Next slide. And there I am. My father's got me poised in the window of our old house, and I'm quite sure I was giving him a dissertation on the thermal efficiency of primary wood windows and the effects of wooden storm windows as well. But since I couldn't talk, I don't know how far it went. Next slide, please. And I was talking about the angels. I've always felt in the presence of angels. I don't know how else to define it. And that's just such a cute graphic. Next slide, please. That's my dad when I was 14. And see, this one I say I checked off all the boxes. When I was 14, my dad found a woman he liked better and children he liked better. He left us. The end, he walked out one night, and then he told me, because I was just 14, I love my dad. When I was 14, he said, don't contact me again. And that really slayed me. That took years to get over, and my mother had a nervous breakdown as a result. So when I was 14, I kind of lost both parents. I mean, my mom was still present in my life, but she really struggled. God bless her. And you know, that estrangement lasted 30 years. He called me up one day. My father was a card. He called me up about 25, 30 years later. He said, hey, I'm sick, I'm infirm, I'm old, my wife is dead, and I'm broke. You want to be friends? Okay, sure, Dad. And I did. Next slide, please. My dad is, I'm sorry, he's the one in the blue suit. Wasn't he dapper? That was his twin brother on the other side. And by the way, my father smoked like a chimney. He literally chain smoked. He'd light a cigarette in the morning, and you could just follow him by the cigarettes, butts all over. Lived 91 years old, a heroic abuser of alcohol and tobacco, and he made it to 91. His twin brother's still going at 100. Yeah, see what happens if you don't smoke or drink? Next slide. And there I am. By the time I was 21 years old, I'd had several jobs. I had that sweet ride. Is that not a sweet ride? 1974 Super Beetle, 1600 cc's of power right there. A lot of hair. Had a leisure suit. Actually, that's not a leisure suit. That's a pantsuit. I paid $80 for that suit, I'll have you know. I had a husband, was married, and I had 2 children by that point. So I was living large. Next slide. There we go. Oh, throughout my life, for whatever reasons, I didn't make it, it's complicated reasons, I didn't have an opportunity to go to college. So I decided, all right, not going to do college, that's sad. I believed myself to be dim, a dullard. So I committed to read 2 to 3 nonfiction books a week for the rest of my life because I wanted to be able to converse intelligently. And I was drawn to the near-death experience books. And I read them like it was my job. I read them repeatedly. I read every book I could get my hands on. I had such a hunger for these titles. And by the way, Kenyon Brinkley, the movie, Saved by the Light, anyone seen that movie with, Eric Roberts? You have. Anyone else seen that movie? Oh my gosh, it's so good. And plus Eric Roberts, woo, he's a good-looking man. Next slide. Oh, I have 3 perfectly normal daughters. There's so much that's right with that picture. Not surprisingly, my daughters are beautiful, educated, intelligent, competent, capable, successful, and they're all a half bubble off plum, just like Mom. And I thought that picture really made that point. I titled that The Serial Killer. Is that not perfect? Because I'm sure my youngest would be deeply pleased to know that I put this picture in a public talk. Oh my gosh. But the cat with the bib is my favorite. It shows how desperate that animal is for a little nutrition, doesn't it? She is a sweet child. She really is. Next slide. There you go. Oh yeah, after 24 years of marriage, the marriage went kaput. What's kind of fascinating, I've read about intergenerational curses. Has anyone else read about those? My mama was the youngest. When she was 14, her dad ran off with another woman. I was the youngest. When I was 14, my father ran off with another woman. And when my youngest was 14, my husband didn't want to be married anymore. So I realized, and part of the prayers of breaking out of this stronghold of depression, despondency, sadness, living in this world when I'm not really set up for it, was breaking down those intergenerational curses. Next slide. And as I mentioned, 2002, a lot of big things happened. Mother's passing was, I was inconsolable for a long time. She and I were connected in so many ways. Real quick story about my mom. Back in the day before cell phones, I used to work on old houses, fix them up and rent them out. Oh, that was another crummy career. Gee, if you ever want to torture yourself, just be a landlord. God, I can't believe, even now I just think, whoa. So I was working on a house, didn't have a cell phone back in the early 80s. Mom said, well, you know, I'm getting old. What if I need you? I said, Mom, if you need me, just call my name. I will hear you. I will hear you heart to heart. So one day I'm out working in the yard of my crummy 4-unit apartment building and being harassed by tenants, as I always was, and I heard Mom call my name out loud, audibly. So I ran to the payphone down the block and I called her up and said, Mom, 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 are you okay? What's up? What's up? She goes, that was just a test. But it works, doesn't it, Rosemary? Uh-huh. Next slide. Oh, that was CBS Sunday Morning News. That was a lot of fun. Oh, yeah. And then I tried internet dating. Yay! Actually, one of my lesser-known books that never went anywhere, but maybe one day it will, was it was a book about internet dating. I had 70 first dates. I kept a journal of every date and said, he is such a loser. However, he's a good kisser. However, he said he didn't like my hair and my forehead's too big, so scratch. It's a pretty interesting read. So yeah, internet dating. I met somebody that I thought was my soulmate, the man of my dreams, everything wonderful. That's one of the problems. I guess the word would be an empath. I am an empath. And I tend to romanticize the world when, you know, and I have a thing for men that wear white Oxford shirts, ties, and good-looking suits. Somebody said a man in a tailored suit is to a woman what a woman in a negligee is to a man. And I think that's true. So I met this guy, and boy, was he a dapper dresser. He was a handsome fellow, and he was a historian. He was brilliant, had an eidetic memory, which is when you read something, you remember it the rest of your life. He was a lawyer, and he was bad news. Next slide. So I did what every crazy empath does. I married him. We were engaged 2 months after meeting. He said I was a soulmate. He said all the right things. He knew exactly what to say. I thought all the sadness of my life was now in the past because I'd married this wonderful fellow. Let's see, where am I on that? Next slide, please. We moved into this grand house in Norfolk. I painted it pink. I loved the house. I loved my husband. I really thought I had achieved all my dreams. Being a driven person, I had a 4-page mission statement of what I wanted in my life. And everything was falling into place. I had the husband with a white Oxford shirt who brought me flowers once a week, who I thought was just, you know, the most, like I said, just, he had everything. He really did. I thought he was wonderful. Next slide, please. And then I got a dog. Now that's unconditional love on 4 legs right there. That is Teddy the dog. And Teddy the dog is still with us, Teddy. But I really thought I had it all at this point. And I talk about gratitude every day of my life. I kept a gratitude journal, and it was always my husband, my home, my dog. God has blessed me so richly. And my life with my husband wasn't easy. He was a trial attorney, a successful trial attorney. And the divorce rate of trial attorneys is over 75%. Because they will not lose an argument. And they know how to argue. And they're really good at it. So that wasn't easy. Actually, it was horrible. And I thought it was just the cost of doing business with somebody that was so brilliant, so handsome, so interesting, and so much like my father. Not a good choice. But I would write, I'm living a dream. All my dreams have come true. I'm so grateful to God. I mean, that was the consistent theme of my life. And yet through this time, as the years went by, things in the marriage got hard, but I said, I'm sticking with this. And when he did things that were off, I'd say, you know, I just need to see more of God's image and likeness in this man. I need to see more of the goodness of God in him. And oh my, how I wore myself out on that. I really did. And then in the last year or two, I guess about a year and a half before the last year we had together, I had a recurring dream that he had died suddenly and tragically, and that I ended up in a horrible, slummy house. It was greasy. All the houses in my nightmares were greasy. I think I have a thing for grease. It's probably from all those years of cleaning that 4-unit apartment building. Man, a tenant can grease up an apartment faster than anything. It's like you just pour the cooking oil over every horizontal surface. But in my dreams, the house that I'd been forced to live in now was dark, dank, smelly, dirty, and greasy. And in these nightmares I must have had this nightmare 40 or 50 times. He was dead. I lost everything. I moved in this crummy house. I would panic and I'd think, what has happened to my life? Where did it all go? And I woke up. Every time I woke up, I would actually slip my hands under the pillow of my bed where I was sleeping to feel the warmth of the mattress pad. And I think, oh, thank God, I'm home. My husband's alive. Everything's okay. And I actually go to my husband, and because we were sleeping we slept in adjoining rooms because somebody snored. And I said, I had this horrible nightmare that you died. And he would always say, I'm not going anywhere. And I'd hug him and kiss him, and I'd redouble my prayers. I prayed for him every morning and every evening of my life. I literally covered that man in prayers. I used to tell him, I need to die before you. You can live without me. I'm not going to be able to live without you. Because he just felt, I don't know, it was not right. And I think it was part of the whole dad thing. I mean, who knows? I'd had a not so great dad, a not so great first marriage, and I just had all my hopes in this thing. But anyway, the nightmares continued. And then one day the nightmare came true. Next slide, please. He, unbeknownst to me, he kissed me goodbye one day and put a Glock in his mouth and ended his life. I wasn't at home when it happened and had to fly home. And it destroyed me. And, we had to wait 7 days for the funeral because he was, we had to have I didn't want it. They did an autopsy to determine that it was indeed a suicide, and it was. And I went into shock. And I thought I had known trauma in my dad leaving. No. The trauma that comes with something this severe is like a nuclear detonation in your brain. I always prided myself on being a pretty smart girl, and the reason the Sears homes were so important is I have a wonderful memory for images. Sears offered 370 designs of kit homes. When I decided they'd be my career, I memorized each of those 370 designs. So then I could do neighborhood surveys, drive down the street and say, oh, stop the car, it's a Sears Avondale, because I would match the houses to one of the 370 designs in my head. And, just kind of look at it and, nope, not one, go on. So, I lost all that. I lost my memory. I lost chunks of time. I remember when the call came that he'd been found and the horror of it all. I looked at my cell phone and I thought, I have to call my children. And I looked at that phone and I thought, why did I buy a phone I don't know how to use? And I just stared at it and I thought, how do you make this go? And that's just one sample of hundreds of how this literally blew up my brain. And for a long time, and it's still coming back, I lost my intellect, my intelligence, my mental capabilities. I have a Facebook page with almost 4,000 people talking about Sears homes, and people post houses now, and I look at them, and I can get them about 75% of the time, but I've lost a lot as a result of that. It really slayed me. Next slide. I don't want to get, this isn't a talk about suicide. We're not going to go down to that bunny trail, but it matters because it's the backstory of why this healing in my life subsequent to the near-death experience was so important. After his death, I left the house. I never spent the night in that house, our home, again after the funeral. I couldn't. So I left the house and I would go once a day. My friend Milton would house sit for me, and he was taking care of the dog at the time. And I would go to the house once a day, and he would come out in the driveway and bring me a bottle of Gatorade or some cookies and my clothes for the day, because I also had stopped eating. I lost a tremendous amount of weight in a very short period of time. I couldn't force food down. I felt like I was going to be sick on my stomach 24 hours a day. So I started hanging out at churches, and I can tell you the good churches if you want to hang out during the day. The Presbyterians threw me out as being homeless, which... I did look homeless for a time. I had a canvas bag that I just took with me everywhere, and it got pretty tattered, and I'd go too long between showering, and I got pretty grimy looking. The Catholics got it going on. Don't know about the Mennonites. I didn't come out here, but the Catholics keep their doors open, and I would go into the Catholic churches all over the community and just sit in the pews and beg God, either let me die or save me, because I'm going down. I am going down. This is not going well for me. I was in hell, and that dream, the reality was worse than what I thought was my worst nightmare. Next slide, please. I also started spending a lot of time in my car. I found it very comfortable. I slept well. It had heated seats in the sunroof, and it was a great car. So I started taking long naps in the car, and I knew I was close to living out of the car, and it felt very comfortable. Felt like a good idea. Actually felt like the thing to do. Next slide. The church didn't know what to do with me. I had been attending a church, nameless, and they didn't know what to do with this level of trauma. And most people don't. And the psychiatric facilities in this country are really not set up to handle somebody who's in trauma. My children called and called and called trying to find a psychiatrist who could see me on short notice. And they were talking about getting me in to see a psychiatrist 6 weeks out. And I was living in 5-minute increments at this point, telling myself, okay, you made it through another 5 minutes, get through the next 5. Just get through the next 5. Just get through the next 5. So it turned out I have a friend who's a psychologist, and she got me in to see a friend of hers, and so I was able to see somebody in about 10 days, but that shouldn't be the way it is, that you have to have connections to get medical care in this country. Pardon me. That same psychologist, I overheard her talking to my family when she thought I was out of earshot, pardon me, after what I call the bad thing. I heard her tell my family, you need to make long-term plans for her. She's not coming back. She's done. This is not something people come back from. Because he had blamed me in his last text. He sent out a text before he pulled the trigger. He had blamed me as the reason he had to do this. And I was not to blame, but it was a way to divert attention. Poor man, his shrew of a wife drove him to this. And he put the phone, he always kept it in his left rear pocket, curious habit. He moved it to the front to make sure when he did this, the body fluids wouldn't be damaged, because the cops saw that message first. And that message went far and wide that I was to blame for this man doing what he did. So yeah, my psychologist friend said, prepare yourself. She's done. This is it for her. She'll always need care. She'll always need somebody managing her, taking care of her. Next slide. I felt like a wounded animal. I had been ostracized from the pack, put out, and I was sure, and this is no joke, I was sure the coyotes would come for me soon. I just knew I was going to be gone soon. One of the things that happened in church, and I still love church and I love religious organizations with my whole heart, but the church, one of the churches that I had been involved at, because interesting, I started going to 3 church services a day on Sunday after this. Again, I just felt very safe in church. So the Catholics got it going on at 6 o'clock Mass, Presbyterians do 8:30, Methodists sometimes, and then I would go to typically a Baptist service at 10:30. Those Baptists have the best food too. Oh my gosh. The Baptists know how to eat. But at one of the churches, they do the thing where they say, if anybody wants prayer, come forward after the service. So one day after the service, I went forward, and this was a church that had known my husband and knew me, and the laity, or I guess the assistant minister, I don't know, she said, they knew my circumstances, and I had the shakes a lot. Oh my gosh, I was a mess. She said, before we pray, you need to confess your sins. I said, okay. I could have been a better wife. She said, no, you need to confess all your sins. I said, okay, sometimes I argued a little bit with him. She said, you need to confess before the Lord so that we can pray effectively for you. And I said, and I'm pretty proud of myself, in the depths of my despair and pain and anguish, I said, hey, what are we going for here? What are we after? And that went over well. She said, did you cheat on him? And I said, no. And she said, well, there has to be some reason he did this. Man like that wouldn't do this without a good reason. And I said, we're done. And I have never been to another, when they summon you to come forward and say, we can pray for you, I think, we're not doing that again. Oh no. And yet I still love the church. But yes, when there's a suicide, you just have to back up and say, this person's hurting so much. Next slide. This article makes me wild. If you read the first line, what is it? Though I've never lost a friend or a family member to suicide. That should have been the end of the article right there. He explains that suicide has simple reasons. This is so bad. I can't tell you how many people would come up to me and say, he probably was depressed. You don't know what it's like to be really depressed. He probably was, he just was under so much stress and blah, 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 blah. I don't want to hear it. He did this. He made a conscious decision. He wasn't some young adolescent lost and being bullied. He was a 63-year-old man. I don't want to hear it. The spouse, the suicide survivor, as we're known, is suffering under so many burdens and so much pain that when you start hypothesizing as to why somebody you don't really know did this, you are hurting them so much. These kind of comments blew me up, and I sent me back months in my recovery. Next slide. 2 years after his suicide, on the day, April 16th, 2018, was when I got a text from a mutual friend that had known both of us. I opened my phone, somebody's texting, yay, people are talking to me, I'm so excited. And I opened the phone, or I looked at the phone, and it said, do you think he killed himself because you were cheating on him? And I thought, what is wrong with people? What the heck? First, I was not. And secondly, I'm in a group of suicide widows on Facebook, about 1,000 women. There are women who make mistakes or do things that maybe aren't the most brilliant, and then their husband kills themselves. They're never right again either. So you do not need to be, I don't know why anybody would do that, but it hurt me deeply. Next slide. My family, not my family, that's not fair. A family member and 2 friends took a vote and decided I needed to be put in an institution. And they were going to do it the day after his funeral. They just decided that would be the best thing. And my buddy, Milton, said, nope, that'll finish her off. And he's right, it would have. I did not want, one, I don't do drugs well. I have bizarre responses to pharmaceuticals, always have. And 2, the idea of being locked in somewhere, I knew it would fit. The only way I found peace was running around all these churches and, going to parks and looking at the sun. Next slide, please. And that's my friend Milton, who told my family we're not doing that. And he volunteered to take care of me as long as it took until I could maybe start feeding myself and dressing myself and return to some level of normality. And that was a big deal, and that saved me. That absolutely saved me. I thought I was lost too. I didn't think, I knew. I used to pray every night that I would die in my sleep. Every single night, every single day. God, let me die. God, please make this end. I know I can't kill myself. It violates a spiritual contract, but I cannot do this. So please let me go in my sleep. Let this end. I can't do this another day. I can't face another 24-hour increment of 10-minute sections. I can't do it. So Milton made sure I ate, and this was 4 months. No, actually, how long was it? I just kind of wandered from house to house for a time, letting friends take me in. But they didn't know what to do, and it wasn't a good solution. Next slide. Oh, by the way, you notice how much he looks like Boo? Can you go back one? See, we always thought he bore a stunning resemblance to Boo, the cutest dog in the world. See the beard thing going on? The brown eyes? Next slide. And this woman her name's Tracy Gaskin. She's a realtor in this area, or actually in Hampton Roads area. She found out I was getting really comfortable in my car and that I wasn't eating and that I was really at risk of, I couldn't find I didn't want to find a house. I knew if I found a house and it was like the nightmare, it would finish me off. So Tracy said, you're not doing this sleeping in your car anymore. This ain't happening. And she said, you come live with me. I said, you do not want me in your house. Trust me. I scream through the night. I cry in the middle of the night. I wander through the house. I pace. You do not want me in your household. She had a husband at home. She said, no, we're doing this. Next slide, please. And that was my bedroom for 4 months. And at night, she would work, I guess she worked 12 to 14 hours a day. At night, she would come home and she would stand at the foot of that bed and pray for me. Every night. I felt safe in that house. It was as good as sleeping in a pew. And that's saying something. I felt very safe there, and she was so kind to me. And I started eating again. Because she would sit down with me as I was eating dinner. I said, you don't understand. I'm living off half a Boost a day. I cannot eat. And she said, no, let's try. Let's just try. So she cooked for me, though she was exhausted, and she took care of me. And she was remarkable. But I had lunch with her just a few days ago. And I said, I can't tell you what it meant to me that you would come in every night exhausted, too tired to stand, and stand at the foot of my bed and pray for me every night. She said, do you know why? And I said, well, I know you loved me and you cared. And she said, when I would come in, I could hear you whimpering, moaning, and crying. You never had restful sleep. You were just, even in your deepest sleep, you were whimpering and making these terribly sad noises and talking. She said, and when I prayed for you, those noises would stop. So, next slide. And so for 4 months, I lived on a 110-acre peanut farm outside of Suffolk. And that fed my soul. Next slide. This is Vincent van Gogh's The Good Samaritan. Somebody showed me. I did a lot of traveling for a time. I mainly was just running, and very common among trauma victims. You just run. You got to be somewhere other than where you are. And when you get where you're going, that works for you. You got to run somewhere else. In my travels, I encountered a woman who showed me this painting, and I cried. Artwork's never done a thing for me, but this one I wept, because look at the effort that the man from Samaria is putting into getting that wounded traveler up on the horse. Look at the effort. And that's what it takes. It does. I mean, the baked beans at 6 o'clock in the evening that you bring over in a casserole are great. But it takes somebody who says, I'll take care of her until she can feed herself again. It takes somebody who says, come live at my house for 4 months. It takes a lot of effort to save somebody who's this messed up. Next slide. And so in October 2016, 6 months after the bad thing, Teddy and I were reunited, and we lived in a house in Churchland in Portsmouth. And Milton came to stay in the spare bedroom. We had 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. It worked out beautifully. And the nightmares were still an ongoing thing, and Milton slept in the room across the hall. And when I would start screaming, he was very faithful. He'd come and he'd shake me. He'd say, wake up, wake up, wake up. And a lot of times I'd say, just sit in the chair by my bed. I can't go back to sleep. And so that man lost a lot of sleep. And he would read me for Psalm 1 billion times and just stay with me and get me through the long nights. Next slide. I covered my wall with affirmations, positive ideas, Bible verses, because if I was walking through the house and I had a freak out in my own home, that happened a lot. I could stop the wall, read something, and say, okay, that's the truth. That is the truth of God. I can rewrite the scripts. Next slide. In October 2017, I bought this house out in Suffolk, and again, Milton shared a spare bedroom. About 4 months after that, I said, I need to live alone for a while. I need to know I can. I have to try. And it was so nice having somebody who, made me dinner every night, but I said, I have to try. So Milton purchased a home in Portsmouth, not too far away, and Teddy and I started living here alone in, I guess, March or thereabouts. Next slide. And all was well until I went into the hospital for a very minor outpatient procedure. It was a cervical biopsy, and I was promised it'd be no big deal. And I told him I've never been unconscious due to anesthesia. I've never had surgery. I had three babies the normal way. I've never been anesthetized. And it was funny. They called me up to do the pre-anesthesia interview, and they said, Mrs. Blank, we're not going to use his name, he who shall not be mentioned's last name, your file's pretty thin. I said, I don't do doctors. And they were shocked. So they woke me up from the surgery. They said, everything's fine. And, they stir you around to get you dressed and get you out the door because, somebody else needs that little tiny cubicle with the plastic sheets. So they got me up, and I went to the potty to prepare to get dressed, and I realized I was breathing very heavily. And I went back to the RN. Pardon me. I went back to the RN, and I said, I got a problem. She said, once you get home, you'll be fine. Excuse me. And 2 more times I went to her, and I said, this ain't right. I'm bleeding a lot. And she said, it's just stress. Get home and lie. Would they say that to a man? Oh, honey, you're fine. So I went home dutifully. And I had to do over again. I said, look, chick, you get whomever is in charge because we got an issue. And I think at the hospital I lost about a pint of blood just in the 3 short visits to the potty. So then I go home, and I'm still, it's just a river. It's not getting worse. Bleed, 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 bleed. I go home. And I don't think I was home very long. And Milton's sister, Mabel, had come to stay and help with, the different duties and the different cares. And they were both trying to be very encouraging. And we all saw, it's amazing how much you can bleed out before you're done. It's amazing. And I came out of the bathroom because I was hanging out. Didn't want to mess up my beige carpet because, there's nothing more important than the wall-to-wall carpet when you're bleeding out and dying. So I came out of the bathroom and I said, call 911, I'm going. And Milton said, I'll get you there faster. And I said, nope, call the ambulance. So they called and they came in the house, and I don't think they understood how bad it was. But anyway, they transported me to an ER that was not connected to a hospital. Did y'all know there's such a thing as an ER that's not connected to a hospital? So they take me in and they do an exam, and the doctor was very sweet, but I saw fear in her face. And I thought, that's not a good look. And the RN by my side was about my age, and one of these just wonderful, wise and wizened, kind, compassionate, sturdy as an oak RNs. And I grabbed her hand and I said, promise me I'm not going to die. And she looked at me with great sincerity and much love. And she said, oh, honey, we got solutions for this. You're not going to die, I promise. I was like, all right. So then, because of the exams, I was in great pain. By the way, exsanguination, as it's known, not a bad way to go. You just kind of go, I'm really tired. I think I'll close my eyes. But they gave me some Dilaudid to manage the pain. And I said, just a half dose. I'm hypersensitive to drugs. And honestly, I was still coming off the general anesthesia. I mean, this is only, I guess, 2, maybe 3 hours after the surgery. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. So they gave me the Dilaudid, half dose. And it was very close to my last words being, man, that's some great stuff. The curtains were kind of dancing around. My friend Milton stayed by my side as I'm lying on the gurney, now unconscious, and you know, I had to get up to use the potty when this was before the, you know, as soon as I got to the ER, I had to get up and use the potty. And as I walked across the hallway to the bathroom, I left a bike path wide trail of blood. And they made a big deal at the ER that nobody would cross it. Nobody wanted to walk through all that blood. And I thought, I got bigger problems here. But they left me alone in the cubicle, and Milton was with me. And next slide, please. There we go. Oh yeah, Mabel, Milton's sister, stayed back at the house in my living room. She told me later she got on her knees and she prayed for close to an hour that after everything I had been through, that God would spare me, that God would protect me, that God would keep me safe, that this was not to be my end. Because Milton and Mabel both told me later they knew this was happening, that it was not looking good. So Mabel spent an hour in my house. That is one prayed for house. I used to march around the outside of the house declaring that I was safe in that home. I would pray over that house. I did that every day for a long, long time. So Mabel was back in my living room on her knees praying without ceasing. God bless her for that. Next slide. They hooked me up to one of those automatic blood pressure cuffs. It didn't look like that. It's one of those electronic jiggies that keeps, contracting, I guess, every 2 or 3 minutes. And Milton was watching it, and he said, your pressure started going down, down, down. Next slide. And at one point he looked up, and it was 32/25, which ain't good. That means you're going. You're on your way. And he said, about this time, and I'm so grateful to have had a witness to this. I mean, gosh, what do we do without somebody that jumps into the fray with us and fights the demons in hell? He said, I tried to sit up on the gurney, which is impressive because I'm at 32/25, but I couldn't quite sit up. So I lifted my upper body. And again, I have no conscious memory of this. I put my hands straight up. And he said, put your head straight up, talking to the ceiling. And he said, you were talking to somebody that only you could see. And he said, he stood up and he leaned over me and said, Rose, what do you need? And he said, it was like he wasn't even there. I didn't see him because I was talking to somebody else. A couple very smart, spiritually minded friends said, that's when your soul left. That's when you went. And my friend Dick Dingus said that that's so typical when the veil is very thin at the end, when you're so close. You use your last bit of energy to talk to the angels, to go where you're, to start moving where you're headed. Milton said after that, I flopped back on the gurney and my blood pressure went to error, which means it was lower than 32/25. I do believe that when it got that low, when I reached up, I think that's probably when the soul, or whatever we want to call it, left. Because Milton said, then the nurses and the medical staff came running down the hall, very excited, shooed him out of the room, brought out, I guess, the crash cart. He said he heard all kinds of noises in there. Next slide. Oh, that was the reaching out to heaven. I remember, I don't remember. Milton said that I put my hands straight up, fingers wide, like that. Next slide. If you've read the article in the paper, you know that I described leaving my body like toast popping out of a toaster. It was, I was unconscious when I was alive, and I woke up when I died. And that's what's so darn cool. How cool is that? And I described it as though somebody had taken a great big elastic band and put it from the heel of my foot to the crown of my head and just kind of leaned back on it and let it pop. I went out with a boing, a pop, a ping, I don't know what you call it, but it was almost startling, but not. Because I woke up with a start, woke up as in dead, and I was just moving, floating through blackness, perfect blackness. And it was just so great. I was having a great time. And I was thinking, my first thought was, and this is really cool, my very first thought was, I said it out loud, my heart has stopped. And then I thought, how do I know that? And I thought, I don't know, but I do. And I thought, wow, all my life I've been worried about dying, and here it happened, and it was no big deal to me. Imagine I didn't look too good back on that gurney. But and then I thought, and I'm speaking out loud, which is also getting my attention because I have no breath. And yet, vocal cords require air moving past them to create sound. And yet I'm talking. Don't have lungs, don't have breath, but I'm talking. I hear it. Sounds good too. Sounds just like I sound now. And then I thought, I am dying. And then, ever being the editor, I started life at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The editor in me says, actually, correction, you're not dying, you're dead. And I giggled out loud because I cracked myself up, you know. And then I heard my giggle, and my giggle was just the same. I thought, wow. And I'm trying to observe, and I call it the blackness, but it was silky, soft, velvety, smooth, comforting. And that's the thing, it was a verb, it was comforting. It wasn't just comfortable, it was comforting and soothing and peaceful. And I remember thinking, I'm scared of the dark, but I am liking this. And I kept thinking, what did I leave behind on that gurney? Everything I am. My intellectual curiosity, my awareness, my giggle, my goofy, macabre sense of humor, everything went with me. That gurney. I thought, not my problem. And, you know, throughout this, I heard somebody screaming my name. And it was like, you know, I'm walking this way, and the voice is back here, and they're fixed, and they can't move, but I kept hearing Rosemary in an urgent, screaming voice. And I could tell it was not screaming, but just strong, frightened, etc. And the more that I floated away, the softer the voice got. And what's fascinating to me is they were screaming Rosemary, and I never turned around. And that's what it felt like, that I'd need to spin 180 degrees to address the voice. I never responded, and I never turned around. And in retrospect, I think I wasn't Rosemary now. I wasn't author, friend, mother. I was just the child of God. And that's why I didn't respond. I don't know, but I find that, because, you know, if I called out somebody's name, they involuntarily whip around to see what's going on. So I'm floating around, and some people have said, well, you didn't want to die because you came back. And I said, no, I was done. Hallelujah. I literally said, I am so happy. This is over, and I got away clean. And I thought, this is great. My whole life I've been so worried, and we're done. We're done. I can't wait to see what comes next. And then the other thought I had was, floating. I like floating. Floating is fun. This is great. And I ended up back at the hospital for 5 days, and then I got home and I wrote all this stuff out. I thought, I sound like a 5-year-old. I'm a writer. Floating is fun. This is great. I like floating. I thought, oh, gee, couldn't I be more profound? Like, I'm having a really splendiferous time. I like floating, seriously? So, but I was having a good time. So I felt the presence of a huge, massive, huge spiritual being to my left and above me. And I am having the time of my life in this blackness. And like I said, I remember thinking I'm scared of the darkness, but I'm enjoying this. So I turned around to address this being, and again, with a lilt in my voice, because I'm having such a great time, I said, and who are you? Pretty much with that tone. And the voice, again, before I could even hardly get the words out, the answer was instantaneous, and it came with an infusion of knowing. Boy, I've been writing, trying to explain stuff about history for years. If I could just infuse people with knowledge, That is such a much better way to communicate. But it did come with an infusion of knowledge. But the answer was, when I said, and who are you? The answer was, you, Rosemary, me, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I was like, wow. Oh, advance the slides, please. I'm sorry. Yep, blackness, next slide. That blackness doesn't show up too good. And that's Genesis 1:26. I've spent a lifetime studying that Bible verse, but now I got it. And if one thing has changed me about this experience, and there's not one, there's a million, when I get sick or troubled or freaked out, I try to go back to that. I am the image and likeness. There's an original. These things are not my burdens, not my problems. I have an original. There's an original of me. Oh, that was so dramatic. So I continue floating through the blackness, and I wonder if I was really floating, or if the spiritual being had what we would consider in our human language, his arm around me, carrying me. I don't know. But I remember thinking about Paul's verse, the peace that passeth all understanding, and it shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ, which is the next slide, by the way. I got it. This peace is perfect. There's no way to describe this peace. And the peace was not that I was infused with peace. The peace was all the crap stayed behind on the gurney. The fear, the anxieties, the trauma, the sadness, the grief, the mourning, the loss, the regrets, everything negative stayed behind. I was the pure image and likeness. The bad stuff stayed behind. And that was transformative. But I kept thinking about Paul's verse. Yeah, the peace of God. I thought, this is it. It passeth all understanding. Because you can't describe this peace. It's perfect. And I was just so happy to be on my way. And you know what's funny? I had just bought a shiny new red Camry. I had a little golf cart that, a lot of fun. I had this house. And I didn't give one thought to that. All I thought was, I don't want to go back. I mean, I didn't even think I don't want to. I knew I wasn't going back. I knew I wasn't going back. And I also remember thinking, as a writer, as a daughter of Betty Fuller, I've always been anxious, worried. Who is not, what writer have you ever, what artist, creative, interesting artist have you ever met that's not nutty as a fruitcake? We all are. It's just part of the gig. And I thought, I've always wondered what I would look like if I had no fears, no anxieties, no worries. I thought, this is great. I love it. Love it. And I had a life review, but it only went back to when those firemen or the EMTs came to my house to get me, after I was bleeding. And I was so grateful because along with praying every night that I would die in my sleep and this would be over soon, the other prayer I had was, spare me the life review. Living it once was enough. I do not want to see this happen again. I do not want to go through this again. I do not want to know the pain again. Spare me. Spare me the life review, God. And that was a sincere prayer I prayed every single day. So my life review only backed up to when the EMTs came to my house. And it was so cool because it's like we're in this experience wearing these smudged over glasses with wax paper over them. And then when we die, there's such a pristine clarity, such a precision. All that fog is gone. And I remember thinking, this is the way to live. This is it. This is where it's happening. It was, incredible. I wanted to just revel in that. And then, I'm not sure of the timing, but parts of this have been blanked out, and I think it's purposeful. The next thing I knew, I was in a white room. I don't remember transitioning from the floating in the black to being on my feet, kind of sort of feet, in this beautiful white room. And I didn't see relatives, and I didn't see beauty. I didn't see a meadow full of wildflowers. I'm kind of hoping on that one. I just was in this blank, stark white room. But the lighting, it was luminescent, iridescent, brilliantly lit. And being the architectural historian, I observed the fixtures, and there were none. The walls were illuminated from within. The ceiling was illuminated from within. And it was the most perfect, intense, brilliant white light. And there was like a fine mist in it. And so I see a door on the far end of the room, and I'm like, I've been reading about these near-death experiences my whole life. I know what that door's about, and I'm going for the door. You do not need to ask me twice. We do not need to, let's make a deal. I am going for that door. And I was, and I told my friends, I said I was perambulating toward the door because I didn't know if I had feet. I should have looked. But I was moving on something, and when I had intention, I moved. So I door, focus, door, we're doing the door. So what happened kind of, sort of, maybe perambulating toward that door and looking around me and just in awe of this white light that's now all around me, this whiteness, this brilliance. It's brilliance. It's not even white. It's just brilliance. And I'm going for the door, and I pause, and I ask, is this the divine plan for my life? That a little boo-boo in a medical facility sends me to my reward. Is this the plan? Actually, my question was, is this the divine plan for my life? And the answer was no, but I had suffered from decision fatigue so bad. You know, they tell widows don't make a big decision in the first year or two after your husband's death. When your husband does what mine did, you don't have that choice. You have to sell the house, you have to sell his car, you have to make a million big decisions, and all of them with pretty significant consequences. So I had severe decision fatigue to the point that when my friend Milton would say, "What do you need from the grocery store?" I'd say, "I can't think about that right now. Ask me tomorrow. We got plenty of kibble. Teddy and I will enjoy that." So I can't handle any more decisions. So the answer that came was that whatever you decide to go on, decide to come back, you go with all of God's blessings and mercy and grace and love and care. There is not a bad decision. And I thought, wow, I'm definitely doing the door. And then, and I think this was a little bit of a sneaky Pete maneuver, I thought about that nurse back at the ER and how she held my hand and she promised me I wasn't going to die. And that just popped into my head, except not really, probably. I think one of those sneaky angels stuck that in there. Because being an empath, as my friend Trish said, what a better way to get ya than to think about somebody else and their suffering. And it hit me hard, and I had an instant image of her sitting in a storeroom at that ER, in a closet or a broom closet or something, sitting on a little stool with her head in her hands and sobbing that she had lost this woman after promising her she wasn't going to let her die. And it hit me, if a person has a place here in the next world, it hit me here. And I do remember dropping my right hand from that doorknob and thinking, and I thought, this is going to ruin her day and maybe her life if I die. And I let out a heavy sigh, if one can have a sigh, except I wasn't breathing, so I don't really know what that was about. And in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney with all kinds of things happening around me. Back to the story that I started with is they say, what's your name? What year is it? Where are you? A crummy excuse for an ER. Because I was like, man, why did this happen? And I've always suspected my whole life that when, in cases like mine, the decision to stay or go is made on a spiritual level. You know, that they think, oh, we put the paddles in just the right spot. Nope. The decision was made when that angel put in my head, that RN, who appeared to be my age and nearing retirement, this is going to ruin her day and maybe her life if you die. So that's why I came back. And then that's when the excitement really started. They had put a massive needle in my arm, and it was, I think they really got that I had lost some blood at that point. Because they had an IV hung. Didn't have blood at this ER. Didn't have blood. So they were filling me with saline. And I remember one of the nurses, I had everybody in the room, yay! I love attention. Even if I'm dead, it's still good. I do like attention. Had both hands, the nurse had both hands on that IV bag, just squeezing it with everything it was worth. And I was like, wow. And Milton, who was allowed in after a time, I don't know how long it was, but he was allowed back in the room, and he said, and I love his honesty. He said, you looked like a corpse when they let me back in. I said, that's because I wasn't far from it. But he said, you've heard the expression, white as a sheet. He said, you were. He said, I've never seen skin that color. And he said, and your lips were blue. He said, he said, I've never seen anybody look like that and have a heartbeat. So they had been, hemming and hawing about, before this big time happened, they'd been hemming and hawing about, well, we're going to transport her to a hospital and blah, 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 we can't find a bed, we can't find, blah, 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 blah. But they had the ambulance outside the door waiting all this time, and it's out of politics. Well, we don't have room on this ward, and we're waiting to hear back from this, and blah, blah, blah. Well, the second I came back, they slung me like a slab of meat on that gurney and said, take her now! And I really think they did not want me to code on them again. I think that was their fear. And so I'm in the ambulance, and I don't have a lot of memory of all this, of the details, but I'm in the ambulance. And I asked Milton later, did they load anybody in the back of that ambulance with me, or was it just the two guys up front? He said, no, there was somebody back there with you. Because in that ambulance, I was aware of so many angels, and they were now more real to me than the humans. And I have no memory of any human being in that, because I just felt the angels just swarming me, and it was so great. And I remember we're flying, because the transport from my home to the Suffolk ER was, let's stop for all the lights. And I was like, really? But the transport from the ER to the hospital was probably 100 miles an hour, and it was fun. And I was lying on the back, and they had the window in that door, the side door of the ambulance, the only window that I could see. And so here I am, and they've propped my feet way up in the air for this ambulance ride, you know. And I keep trying to raise up to look at that window, and I just see us flying by cars, and I think, man, the best ride of my life, and I can't see a thing. But it was a good time. Then I got to the hospital, and this was also curious. They put me in just a regular room. They didn't hook me up to anything. I mean, no, just like, you know, she'll probably live through the night. And then the next morning when the doctor came in, that's when I got, you know, hooked up for sound and video and everything else. And they took me in for a gajillion tests. Actually, the first morning when the doctor came, that morning, it was the first time seeing a doctor that was over 28, I guess. But I really liked him. I like doctors my age, because you know they've been around a while. He said, you had a heart attack. And I said, not me. You look at the right chart there, Rosemary? He said, yep, you had a heart attack. I said, what are we talking about? He said, your enzymes were very elevated, but they came right back down, which tells us this is not an underlying heart condition, but you've had a heart attack. And I said, I'm sure you got me confused with somebody else. I bike ride, I walk, I'm very active. He said, nope, we're sure. And I said, what are we talking about? And he said, you suffered a blood loss greater than 40%, which at that point doesn't matter because that's, you know, it's all hydraulics. And when you run out of blood, or you get down to more than 40%, the heart, slide one, please. Oh, we went active. Oh, that's back to the peanut farm. I don't have any more slides. I had a picture of a heart going, ah! But when you get down to less than 40% or more than 40% blood loss, apparently the heart throws off enzymes trying to save itself, and then it says, we're done. So when I said my heart has stopped, I got it right. So they did a lot of EKGs, EEGs, a lot of heart tests, blood work, everything, because they were expecting to find liver damage, kidney damage, and heart damage, and they found none. And those first days at the hospital, it felt like I was in the presence of so many angels that they just, I didn't understand how people could even get in the room. And what was funny is when the nursing staff, because after I survived the first night, the nursing staff was pretty busy, pretty attentive, coming in there regular for blood work and everything. And whenever somebody would come in, I'd say, I mean, here I am, I'm on 100% bed rest, you know, couldn't even get up to go tinkle, on clear broth and Jell-O because they're afraid they're going to have to rush me into surgery any second. So anytime medical staff would come in, I'd say, I died, I went to heaven, I saw the angels, it was great, I had a great time, and you wouldn't believe what I saw. I saw a white room, and I was purified, and I was cleansed, and I was in the white room, and I was great, and I didn't want to come back, but they made me come back, and I really didn't want to be here, but I had a great time, and heaven is great, and life goes on, and things are great. Oh my gosh, you won't believe what I saw. And they'd say, honey, we need to take your temperature, please shut your mouth. So I told that to pretty much everyone who came in those early days. And surprise, surprise, about 50%, probably about 30 to 40% of the medical staff were engaged and interested, and the other ones were like, crazy. And in our enlightened time, it really surprised me how many people were still like, yeah, whatever. And I have been hesitant to share this story with too many people because I've already heard, well, you probably weren't dead. And you know when the brain shuts down, the frontal cortex, blah, blah, blah. But no. Oh, and that woman screaming my voice, Milton was able to tell me that the nurse kept in the ER when I was dead. The nurse kept screaming, Rosemary, and he said you could hear it throughout the whole facility because they're trying to get you back. So what they say about hearing being the last to go, it's true, but they need to scream something else like, you know, I got your waffles ready or something, because that would have brought me back. Or the corn dog. I've always had a thing for corn dogs. Something else, but the name just, it was so disconnected to me. And you know, by the time I had gotten close to that door I saw in the white room, that voice was like a whisper. So the other thing, when Milton came in the next day to visit me at the hospital there, and he didn't tell me this for about a month, he said, your feet and part of your lower legs were blue. And I said, you mean like kind of a whitish, bluish kind of thing? He said, nope, dark blue. And I've since learned that I just didn't have enough blood to go around. And apparently your brain shuts down got long legs, and it says, we got to keep this going. So it shuts off blood to my legs. So the point is, I have medical proof that I left the building for a while, popped out of my body like toast out of a toaster, and had a great time. And the other interesting thing is, after my experience, those days in the hospital were a good time. They really were, and I never thought I'd say that. I just was the angels would sing me songs as I fell asleep. They would sing me the most beautiful songs, and the songs would make me cry. And I was like, you got to let me get the video recorder out for this. And I'm not good at remembering songs, but they were angelic and heavenly. And I really felt, they talked about punching a hole through the world when you do this, and it's a portal. It wasn't a portal, it was like before the fell down. I knew what I was. I knew that the reality is what I saw over there. And we really are just, this is the show. This is the act. The reality is spiritual. And that's about my. I'll read a few things about the experience, because I wrote this right after I got out of the hospital. That's when I like floating. Floating is fun. I was like, come on, really? But right after I got out of the hospital, of course, I made copious notes. One of the things that happened was after I was in the hospital, that first day, I noticed I could hear voices down the hallway of the hospital. And I had suffered from high-frequency hearing loss, just as baby boomers who listen to too much rock and roll. But so this is what I wrote right after the experience. Other things were healed. Chronic back pain and neck pain was gone, as was some high-frequency hearing loss. Old aches and pains in my joints disappeared. Digestive issues vanished. Those were blessings, but the greatest blessing was the erasure and expunging of the sad record of my life with Wayne. In the hours and days after my NDE, as I was calling it then, I prayed about these miraculous healings, and the word encapsulated kept coming to me. I asked the angels to help me understand, and here's what they explained. From the first time I met him in 2006, I said his name. The first time I met him in 2006 to September 5th, 2018, it was an image of this whole time being encapsulated, which is great for an architectural historian, because that's what you do with toxic material like asbestos. You don't want to disturb it, so you encapsulate it. You wrap it up in a way that's completely sealed. So the message I got was, it's there, but it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to eviscerate you. What's eviscerated is the misery you've suffered. Let's see. An image came to mind. An image came to mind of two bookends, one with the first date and the other on my near-death date, and every dark, lifeless, loveless thing between those two was now perfectly encapsulated. The misery had been eviscerated, and it had no power to ever hurt me again. And then I talk about the encapsulate. For 29 months, I'd struggled to forgive him for his heinous acts, and ultimately I decided that forgiving him was a betrayal to my own soul. After I was back from heaven, I couldn't not forgive him. After feeling that I had forgiven him, I asked God, as it says in Acts 7:60, lay not this sin to his charge. You have no idea how much spiritual growth that manifested, because I was pretty angry. I forgave him repeatedly, and it felt wonderful. For the first time in 29 months, I thought about the rich spiritual blessings that came from this experience. I thought about the country song that says, God bless the crooked path that led me straight to you. I thank God for the crooked path of 11 years that led me straight to heaven, spiritual clarity and divine wisdom. For 29 months, I told the story of his rotten behavior to anyone who would listen, from my nearest and dearest friends to the checkout lady at the grocery store. In this new view, I realized this wasn't my story, and why did I keep rehearsing it? Why would I rehearse something so awful and so dark? How could a self-proclaimed enlightened Christian be such an animated cheerleader for the darkness? Looking at it from this view, I felt foolish, and yet I knew I was also forgiven. A few days later, I realized not only was this not my story, it wasn't even his story. He was God's child, and even if he'd made 1,001 terrible choices, he was still the child of the Most High. And there would be a time somewhere in the midst of eternity that he would see that for himself. The original still cared for him. Wayne was working out his own salvation, and none of that was any of my business. He was alone with God, and I needed to leave all of it right there. His issues were not my problems, and I was wrong to have embraced them in my own. In this enlightened view, I couldn't wait to set them down again, forgive him completely, and exit the whole scene as fast as possible. overwhelmed with gratitude for the opportunity to run, not walk, off that stage, dash out of the building and keep going. I didn't want any more part of this dark, depressing performance. And then, 20 pages, I won't read you all of it. But I wanted to write it down. Oh, and the other message that came several times, the wounds and damage left by him were so severe, this is what the angel told me, were so severe that you were on a path towards self-destruction in one form or another. You weren't living in God's will. You weren't even living. You were in survival mode, and that survival mode had become a deeply entrenched habit. That was not God's will for your life. It was a veritable 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. Your prayers have been answered. You were rescued and taken to heaven and spent time with God for complete restoration. And that's what the White Room was about. And that's what I was told in the moments after this experience. The White Room, and I don't even believe in this stuff, but it's where you go to get, I was told this, where you get cleansed. There's people who die from a disease process that goes on for so long it becomes part of their identity. As my friend said, leave your muddy boots at the door. We cannot pass into the heaven, or whatever word you want to use to describe it, until we're shed of this stuff. My great-grandmother suffered diabetes and lost both her legs at the age of 57 and died as a consequence of gangrene. My mother was tormented by the question, did my mom have her legs in heaven? And a family member told her no, that she had to work on that. Well, that's not the case. In the White Room, you're purified inside and out. I met a widow who told me her husband died from cancer. And she said, I felt like if I could just heal his heart, because my husband was so sad and so full of guilt and regret. She said, but I couldn't get in there to heal his heart. And I realized that's what God did for me. He healed my heart. He restored my soul. First time after this experience, I opened the Bible to the 23rd Psalm and I read, He restoreth my soul. And I burst into tears because I realized that's what happened in heaven. My soul was restored. I was circling the drain. It's not a good idea to pray every night that you go quickly. It's just not a good plan. And what the message was, the point of this was to save you from the memories and the nightmares and the horror. The evil was the muck. And even though you'd been extricated from the hellish circumstances, you were still mired in the cesspool and becoming accustomed to living in filth because you'd forgotten what it feels like to live in the light of God's love. You were washed clean and restored to wholeness. Trust that God has made the crooked places straight, and you'll never get tangled up like this again. You won't fall for this one ever again. You now understand how evil operates, so that it's impersonal and powerless, and you've learned a cosmic lesson, and you are a new being in God. God's love reached you and restored you. And that message came to me repeatedly. And I still suffer from occasional depression, and boy, anxiety still gets me. But I no longer take any drugs. I stopped drinking. Went through my alcoholic phase back in the day. I find a way to calm myself, to go back to that black space the blackness where I felt perfect peace. So I'm on a much better path to healing. So many people said, after seeing me after this, they said, you even look different. I said, I know I do.